thrusting spear. And then we have the pilum here. There's some shields out.
Wonderful stuff there from Dash. I do have a pilum. I've yet to throw it at anyone or anything, though there have been moments. And I will do a video on it because there are a couple of features on there I'd like to get into. But anyway, in relation to that video, I think it beautifully demonstrates an important point, pun intended, about the pilum. And that was that it had this extra capability of punching through things. And you could see that when you saw what happened to those two shields. So if you've got a more conventional sort of tip, as it were, or end to something pointy you're throwing that's quite large, great. It can do a lot of damage when it hits something, but it kind of stops. It's not going to go in too much, although you can argue that's enough. But the difference of the pilum is it has quite a narrow end, and then it has a narrower shaft behind it, which means there's no larger piece to go through the hole that's already been punched. So, if you can imagine this, once this hits and goes through, there isn't anything big behind it for quite a while that's going to prevent that carrying on. And so what you have is these pilum being able to hit shields and possibly go through them, and then they can get the person behind them. But more importantly, I think, is their use as a shock weapon, because you've got to think about how these were being used. So what you'd have is you'd have whichever unit size were engaging with the enemy. You'd have the front couple of ranks. And by the way, there's a lot of debate about how they were used, and it's probable they were used in a number of different ways. I think that if you're searching for a standardized way, I think that the tactical capabilities and the flexibility of the Roman army lent itself towards any one thing being used in a number of different ways. And in fact, there's a great example of this, because at the Battle of Pharsalus, when Caesar faces off against Pompey, his men use their pilum as spears to confront the cavalry, to counter the cavalry in what is considered an unusual way of using them. So we have this generally within the Roman army. You know, there's never one way of using any one thing. So perhaps searching for that is a bit of a fool's quest, although it's important to try and do it. I'm not calling anyone a fool, by the way. So what you'd have is you'd have the first couple ranks using this weapon against the enemy. And they'll be using it at quite close range, because these things have to be thrown. They're not that heavy, but they're not going to go a huge distance. They're not like when you see the Olympics and they're throwing some javelins at great distance. These are used over, so I think it's about sort of 10 meters, something like that. A short range, don't quote me on that, but a shortish range. I'll look that number up for you when I do a specific video on the pilum. The point is, again, pun intended, that these would have been loosed at the enemy. So imagine you're on the receiving end. Now, one of several things is going to happen. Either it's going to hit you, that's it, good night. Or it's going to possibly go through your shield, disable your shield. You've got something else to think about. It's putting your focus elsewhere, which is where the Romans want it. They don't want you focusing on them too much. Alternatively, it could take someone out next to you, or you'll be aware of them flying around. Again, where is your focus? It's not necessarily at those bunch of guys charging at you that are now about to engage you closely. So that's why it was a shock weapon, because by the time you were picking yourself up and dealing with what had just happened, when you'd have a good number of these arrive around your person or on it, you were suddenly dealing with relatively heavily armored individuals who are very capable of using the weaponry they got, and they got to you close, because again, you have to think the Roman legionary, the time of the imperial period, was close quarters. So this was a way of closing that gap by keeping your brain occupied by the more terrifying thing, which was all of those pila flying at you. So I think we always have to consider the weaponry, as it were, in the psychological context, and how that might have put you in. And again, this is what the Romans want to do to you. They want to put the heebie-jeebies about you, and they want you to run, they want you to break. They don't want you to be a concerted force that they have to meet. They'd much prefer you to be broken, disengage with the person next to you. Then it's just a case of a mop-up exercise, which is an awful way of phrasing it, but sadly, we have to deal with the realities of battle. Anyway, Dash, as ever, awesome content, so go and check him out. And I'm going to think about doing a few videos on my pilum and probably having to give it a bit of a clean. Yeah, because it's just not it's got quite a lot of rust, unfortunately. Anyway, be chatting to you later. Take care.